G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Institute, and today I'm pleased to bring you some more exceptional guests from our Economics of a Pandemic webinar series. In this episode, we talk about the pandemic, mental health, and more.
I'm very sorry to have to report that the total number of fatalities due to this global pandemic is now 162. One male in his 30s, 3 males and 1
The mental health impact of the pandemic and the tougher Victorian lockdown are among the greatest challenges.
In the best case scenario, suicide rates will rise by 25%. That's an additional 750 deaths per year, above our national rate already of over 3,000.
See increased rates again of people needing to access support lines, helplines, which is what we want them to do. We absolutely want them to do that, but there's certainly the indicators that this is not an easy time for any of us.
It's incredibly important to people's mental health, and we've got to really think about how we're going to make sure our network of connections stays really strong during this period.
It's not extra mental health services they need income, not counselling. But do they need both?
Yeah, that's what people are saying. We need cash, not counselling.
I know that across Victoria, many today, frankly, would have reached breaking point, trying to come to terms with what has happened in their state, what it means.
And we are with you in this very difficult time.
I'm sure you, like me, have been thinking of friends and family in Melbourne and wider Victoria as a second lockdown with even more stringent restrictions has begun. People have lost their jobs, their livelihoods, their businesses, and in some cases, their loved ones. And for a lot of people, the future feels really uncertain. The lockdowns were hard enough the first time around, and the second time is proving to be even more difficult. So we were absolutely delighted to speak to the Honourable Julia Gillard, the chair of Beyond Blue, one of Australia's leading mental health awareness bodies, and of course, the former Prime Minister of Australia. Ms. Gillard is also the chair of the Global Partnership for Education, the inaugural chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College in London, which through research, practice and advocacy is addressing women's underrepresentation in leadership, and author of the new book, Women in Leadership, which is available in all good bookstores. And she was joined in conversation today by Ben Oakwest, Executive Director of the Australia Institute. This was recorded live on Wednesday, the 5th of August 2020, and things may have changed since recording. G'day and welcome Julia Gillard and Ben Oakwest. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ebony. It's delightful to be here in Canberra, in the Canberra bubble, safe from COVID at the moment. A delightful winter day in some regards, Ebony. You haven't been outside enough, I don't think. An apparent temperature of -6 here. Regardless, where Ms. Gillard is today in South Australia, relatively COVID-free and literally COVID-free at the moment. We're lucky, and unlike Victoria, as some of you will have seen, reported over 700 new cases expected to be reported today. And the Queensland Premier announcing a border closure again with New South Wales and the ACT. So grim news continues on the COVID front. And all this is leading to all sorts of economic consequences, as we know, as well as the health consequences. But one of the big ones is, of course, mental health. So thank you very much for joining us today, Julia, to discuss some of these issues. And I wanted to start by asking kind of big picture question. We're hearing in some places a lot of critique over the lockdowns for the economic consequences they are causing above and beyond the health impacts. What do you say to the critics of lockdowns who say that the mental health consequences of those lockdowns, as well as the economic ones, are significant and come on top of the actual health consequences of COVID itself?
Thanks, Ben, and it's terrific to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, you're absolutely right that alongside the physical health crisis, which is COVID-19, we are seeing a mental health crisis. And in terms of that, just to give you some feel as to how big the dimensions are, Beyond Blue in early April put on a coronavirus-specific support line where you can call up and speak to a mental health professional. And already well over 500,000 Australians have done that. And then we also have services available online through various forums and emails, through web chats, and almost 1 million Australians have got on and engaged in that kind of interaction. So it's telling you that people are really feeling the pressure. But we do need to reassure ourselves we will get through this. It's obviously easier for people to work their way through if they know that there's a finishing line. It's easier for people to work their way through if they're clear about the purpose. And of course, the purpose of the various lockdowns is to help save lives, to keep people in the community free from transmission of the virus. So from our point of view at Beyond Blue, we're not infectious diseases experts. We're not trying to tell government what they should do about pandemic restrictions or lockdown, but we are trying to make recommendations and do service delivery to assist with the mental health burden that's caused.
Can you tell us something about that, the particular program that Beyond Blue has rolled out? There's been a lot of talk about helplines and the like. Can you tell us to start with what particular programs Beyond Blue has been tasked with doing during this crisis?
Yet there are a range of helplines out there, and of course all doing important work. Lifeline is a very well-known one, and people contact Lifeline when they are in suicidal crisis. What the Beyond Blue Coronavirus Wellbeing Support Line is about is a chat, a first instance discussion with a mental health professional. They're literally standing by now, ready to take people's calls. For some people, that first discussion is enough, and the mental health professional can give them tips on coping strategies, where to get online resources, and that's enough for them. For others, they do need a referral for more intensive support, and that can be a clinical referral. And one of the things that has come out of this period in our history is that so much of mental health provision has gone online through telehealth, and that's a development that Beyond Blue had been arguing for quite some time, that mental health services should be more available through technology. We also, as Beyond Blue, have innovated a low-intensity service called New Access. So for people who are starting to get into problems, but they're not presenting yet at the clinical end of the spectrum, New Access gives them, free of charge, a number of interactions with a coach who can help them develop strategies in their life to keep themselves mentally well. And I am pleased to see that the Minister, Greg Hunt, the Minister for Health, recently announced some additional resources for that, so that people can have more access in terms of the number of sessions. And we innovated that service because one of the big gaps in our mental health provision in Australia is some things at that low intensity end. You know, we've got people going to GPs, we've got people in emergency departments, we've got the clinical professionals, but we want there to be stepped care, and to build those steps, we do need the non-clinical low intensity services who are helping people in the early prevention area, that is getting in there before it spirals into something that's going to have a clinical manifestation and perhaps get worse and worse.
You mentioned there that recent move to extend access to psychologists from, I think, 10 to 20 in certain situations. Is that something that needs to be looked at more broadly? Why aren't some of those services more naturally available if doctors are referring patients to it?
Yeah, I agree with you. There's some constriction points in the current system, and there are various lenses on mental health reform at the moment, which is terrific to see. Ben, from your experience in federal government work, you would know that one of the endemic problems in Australia's healthcare system, and it applies to mental health as well, is the duplications, the gaps and the holes that happen because the federal government does some things and state governments do some things. And a bit like physical health, there is and continues to be a range of problems in mental health where you've got workforces that are maldistributed around the country. That is, mental health professionals tend to be in our big cities, not in regional and rural areas. You get people going to GPs for a whole range of things that may have actually been better treated by early intervention services in the community. Keep the load out of the GP office, let the GP focus on people who genuinely need the medical services. So that's why we're very keen to build these low intensity steps and to build telehealth and to keep it as a feature of Australia's mental health care system. So no matter where you are, no matter what access level you need, whether it's, to a non-clinical person who can be a guide to you through all the way to complete crisis support, there is a pathway for you and there is a clear place in the service provision system. At the moment, we believe there is not enough at the early intervention prevention end.
It's a really strange time, of course, for many people. And social distancing or physical distancing or lockdowns is exacerbating the problem of loneliness for some people. Or for some people, it's been put to me, who live alone anyway, have never felt lonely, but all of a sudden do feel lonely. What's the connection between loneliness and mental health issues?
Yeah, we are herd animals. People need people, and there's any amount of clinical studies that go all the way from rodents, rats in laboratories, through to studying actual human beings that tells us that if isolated from a group for a long period of time, if we're lonely, that does increase the risk of depression. So we are built to want and need interactions with others. And, individuals obviously range on that spectrum. Some people are much more socially wired and definitely want to be in the group the whole time. Other people are a bit more happy with their own company. But we all ultimately need some contact with each other. And so we know from the statistics that we went into this crisis with a significant number of Australians saying that they experienced loneliness, and indeed quite a significant number who said when surveyed that they felt lonely on 3 or more days a week. So they didn't have a pattern of connections in their lives, whether that's with family, friends, work colleagues, neighbours in the street. They didn't have that sort of social web and fabric around them. And as we've gone into this period, obviously those pre-existing problems with loneliness have probably been exacerbated. And then, as you say, Ben, people who have never felt lonely before have felt shut away and isolated. We are trying to get the message through that, physical distancing doesn't need to mean social distancing, that we do have a lot of tools at our disposal to keep in contact, whether it's as humble as a telephone call or whether it's using this kind of technology so people can see each other face to face. And we certainly are asking people to check in on family and friends, particularly people that they know who live alone. Many people would be doing all of their work virtually now. They're probably aware of some work colleagues who live alone, and it would be good to just create some social time with them just to chat it through and see how they're going.
Well, there's a good lesson to all of you, a good lesson and advice to all of you out there who are listening. I know thousands of you have tuned into this webinar, and that's great advice about something we can all be doing on the mental health front.
Just 2,257, 58 people, Ben. That's how many people are on with us.
Good day to everyone. It's lovely to be talking to you. Julie, you've touched on this a little bit, but I think it'd be fair to say that the pandemic has kind of put a spotlight on some of the stresses and strains and holes in our mental health system overall. What do you think lies ahead, not just in the pandemic, but beyond, to the kind of wider solutions or gaps that we need to tackle in mental health?
Well, we went into this period with two major bodies of inquiry into Australia's mental health. One, the Productivity Commission, obviously at the national level, and the second, the Royal Commission into Mental Health that was initiated by the Victorian State Government. And the Victorian Commission is continuing to work. The Productivity Commission has issued some of its material. We understand that this is a time where political attention necessarily has to be focused on the immediacy of fighting COVID-19. But as we come out of the immediacy of this crisis into the rebuild, rebuilding Australia's economy and the like, we will be advocating that part of that Build Back Better strategy needs to be taking on board the findings of the federal and the state-based Royal Commission, and then as state and federal governments coming together to really adopt a reform agenda. This is quintessentially something that has to be done by what we used to call in the old days COAG, but we might have renamed during the course of this pandemic National Cabinet. But we're hoping that sort of spirit of bipartisanship and urgency that was shown by National Cabinet and continues to be shown as it works its way through the virus response can also endure into the mental health reform round we need. I'm probably the only defender of COAG on the whole planet. When I was Prime Minister, we did manage to get some pretty big things done through COAG, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, school funding reform. So that structure could work if people saw the need for reform and showed a bit of bipartisan political goodwill. The National Cabinet, I think, has done some fantastic streamlining. So hopefully we can take that agility into the mental health reform round.
Hello, everybody. Again, we are discussing mostly mental health issue here with the former Prime Minister, and we're going to stick to that. But we will divert off occasionally. And your discussion there of COAG and Build Back Better and what might come next. I wondered about your reflections about whether something good might come out of this crisis. And one of the bits of research that we've got coming up is showing a renewed level of faith and trust in parliaments, in fact, and there's been a lot of reporting about how people are seeing the government as a solution more at the moment than they have for a long time to some problems. Do you think it is possible to build back better? And do you think that renewed belief by a large section of the population that the government is needed in a crisis and a belief in it will endure?
I certainly hope so. I mean, when I look at the medium to longer term, what we will say in a decade's time came out of the pandemic, I can kind of see two futures, and I can see some very big potential upside changes, but I also see some key risks. Of the potential upsides, I do think that this has been a lesson right around the world that government does matter. And I think for quite a long period of time around the world, particularly in countries that have got voluntary voting, it's been fairly easy for citizens to shrug their shoulders and say, what does government do? It doesn't really matter to me. It doesn't matter to my family's life. I don't care. I can't be bothered thinking about it. Here in Australia, because of compulsory voting, that more manifests as the reluctant voter who marches in and just grabs the ballot paper and without thinking about it goes, whatever, fills in the numbers and shoves it in the box. I think this has been a reminder that when the going gets tough, government really matters, and who is running government really matters. And I hope we take that sense with us. I also hope that we take the sense with us that expertise matters. As you would know all too well, Ben, we've been in an era where, particularly in the climate discussion with climate change scepticism, but not just the climate discussion, there has been a sort of reaction against expertise. Why do we have to listen to them? They're the people with all of these qualifications. Isn't it all just about common sense? All of that kind of dialogue. And yet here we are, and all of us are sort of hanging off every word from chief medical officers around the country and from infectious diseases specialists and the like. So it's been a real reminder that expertise matters, and I hope we take that with us too. I am concerned, though, about some, cross-cutting trends. This is truly a global crisis, and it is obviously right to say that none of us are safe until we're all safe, that as long as COVID is anywhere in the world, there's still potential for harm to the planet and to our own communities. I hope that sense dominates, but I am worried that this crisis is going to feed a sense of nationalism, of retreat into countries behind country walls, of less engagement with the world, that we might see the first big manifestation of that in a scramble as to who gets vaccines first when they are available, rather than doing a fair global distribution. So I do worry about that, entrenching nationalism in a counterproductive way as a political setting for the future.
What an interesting reflection about the different directions we could take, and the sliding doors moment that perhaps we're at, which reminds me to take you back to a sliding doors moment of your own, perhaps. It's, I think, 2 weeks to this Saturday that you would have won the 2010 election, which led to the establishment of a multi-party committee on climate change that heard from experts, as you say, and put in place a carbon price. And as part of this webinar today, we're releasing a bit of a research note about what would have happened if that ETS that you'd put in place was still around, which finds that emissions would be 75 million tonnes lower across 2015 to 10, that wholesale electricity price volatility would have been reduced, leading to cheaper prices. And of course, that carbon price was repealed. On the plus side, some of the architecture you put in place remained. The renewable energy target, the increase remained, and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the ARENA and some of those agencies have delivered a massive reduction in carbon pollution and multi-billion dollars in clean energy investment. What's your reflection 10 years on about what would have happened if we still had that ETS to the climate and energy debate?
Yeah, when there was the 10-year anniversary moment of me becoming Prime Minister, the Labor Women's Organisation, Emily's List, put out a series of infographics about things that the government did. One of them was about our carbon reduction emissions trading scheme, and it showed absolutely in graph form that, Australia's emissions were going up, our carbon price came into effect, they went down, and then it was repealed by the Abbott government, and there they go back up. So we would be in a different and better place on climate had that scheme endured. One of the frustrations of sliding door moments is, other than in the famous movie, you don't actually get to go back in time and run the parallel universe. We only live in one universe in this reality. And so what I hope is remembered from that period and taken forward into the future, because at the end of the day, the only point in my view of reflecting back is to help us be better equipped for the future, is that it's possible to put in place a scheme in Australia that does reduce our carbon emissions. And that might seem like a very, simple, even blindingly obvious statement. But it does worry me that sort of the received history is, climate, we've been fighting about that for forever. No one ever does anything. Nothing gets done. It probably can't get done. It's all too hard. It's all too complicated. And I would like us to unpack that to the next level and say, no, it can get done. It was done. And if we did it once, then we can do it again in the future. And that doesn't mean that it has to be exactly the same scheme with all of exactly the same details. Things iterate, needs change over time. But we know how to do this. If we want to do it as a nation, we know how to do it. We can be informed by past experience and we can get on with the job. So I do want to push back against that sort of received helplessness that it's all too hard.
You can go online and have a look at the little paper that we're putting out today about lower prices and less emissions and more investment and jobs in clean energy if we still had that ETS for those watching in. Julia, flicking back to mental health for a moment, it's affecting a lot of businesses, obviously, the lockdown. They're having to close. They're an important part of the community overall. What can businesses be doing to help on the mental health front?
Yeah, it's a tragic time for so many business owners, for, small business and medium business owners themselves. I mean, we're concerned about their mental health as well as concerned about the mental health of their employees. I mean, if you've put your heart and soul into creating a business, perhaps a family business over decades, and you've had to shut its doors, put off staff that probably feel very much like family members because you've worked with them for so long, it's really tough for people. So to business owners themselves, we're saying, it starts with you. And if you're feeling that you are in difficulties on your mental health, certainly do reach out, and the Beyond Blue line is there. And that in and of itself is good role modelling to your employees, to the people that you're in contact with. Something we know very clearly from more ordinary times in businesses is that businesses can have human resources manuals that are, this thick and big, and talk about mental health until sort of the cows come home. But what really cuts through is if one of the leaders, one of the C-suite executives is actually prepared to say, look, I've had mental health issues. I'm prepared to talk about it. I reached out and got help. And if I did and I got through it, then so can you. That role modelling really makes a difference. We would also say to business leaders that this is an important time to sort of over-communicate with staff, where we underestimate, I think, in some ways, just the web of connections that we grow when we're physically in the one space together. When you're all going to the same factory or the same office, you don't need the boss necessarily to come and speak directly to you because, something that's happening in the factory, the boss will communicate with maybe the next line managers down, then they'll go and chat to people, and then people will be chatting about it over morning tea and all the rest of it. So all the web of connections gets the information through, whereas now is a time that if, leaders in businesses don't actually one-to-one through this kind of technology for those in lockdown, make the time to see how people are going and work through issues with them, it's possible that they're worried, not knowing what's going to happen next. We're also trying to get through the message. This is a reasonable time for people to say, I don't know. And, normally leaders, whether they're politicians or business leaders, think tanks, civil society leaders, we don't like wandering out and saying, I don't know. We always like to pretend we've got the answer, even when we don't. This is a time where if you don't know, it's better to communicate that than just leave people wondering whether a decision has been made and they just haven't heard about it. So, the mental health literature certainly shows that we feel at our best when we feel we've got some sense of control over our lives. Now, the pandemic has obviously eroded that sense of control because it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen next. But one of the things that helps us get back that sense of control is the clearest possible line of sight about what's going to happen next, or if it's not possible to communicate that, at least the options under consideration. If it's not possible to communicate that, at least stay in touch so that, you're there able to say to people, decisions haven't been made yet, we'll definitely get back to you when they are being made. We'll definitely talk to you about them, so they're not, sort of sitting at home catastrophizing what might be happening in rooms that they're not in.
we are going to go to the audience soon, but a couple more questions from me. Julie, while on the topic of business, one of the things that a lot of people are pointing out that this crisis and the economic crisis and the health crisis is showing up that some of the most likely to be affected and to be affected the worst are vulnerable communities, and as a result of the casualisation of our workforce and the insecure nature of work, and that's exacerbating some problems. What are your reflections on that, and potentially some of the policy responses, not just for the short term but for the long term?
This is quite a different downturn in the industries and occupations that it's had the biggest impact on. I mean, Australia hasn't had to live with a recession for a long period of time, but the recessions that are in lived memory, for example, the recession of the early 1990s, that was predominantly about the loss of male jobs. It was predominantly about adjustments in the manufacturing sector, and it needed a set of tools to respond to it. This is a different style of dramatic downturn. Obviously, the cause is different. The rate of downturn is so sharply down. And the industries that have suffered first are industries that disproportionately employ women and young people. So that does mean that policy responses are going to need to be informed. And, we can't just get out the old toolkits and start using them again. Policy responses are going to have to be informed by the differently constructed nature of who has been absolutely in the epicentre of the first waves of job losses. One thing that concerns me particularly, obviously every job loss concerns me, but I am particularly worried about young people who come of age during this downturn, this recession. Evidence from earlier recessions certainly shows that if you are the school leaver looking for your first job, or the university graduate looking for your first, full-time job using your new qualification, that if you come of age in that sense during an economic downturn and you miss that first, grab onto the ladder for employment and for a career, that economic disadvantage can be with you for many long years afterwards. And so particular concern needs to be shown towards those young people. We had to think about that quite deeply in our response to the global financial crisis, and we were able to create new opportunities and to bring apprenticeships and traineeship levels back to pre-GFC levels fairly quickly. So that needs to be, I think, front and centre too. Otherwise, one of the long-lived effects of this is going to effectively be a kind of COVID generation that missed out on that first all-important workplace opportunity.
Do you have one last question, Ben?
Yeah, I'm going to sneak one more in and use your mention of women there to segue to your new book, Women in Leadership, and a fascinating book for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. And having watched your Prime Ministership up close, you'd have to say one of the more depressing elements of it was your treatment as a woman. And one of the things, while it's a uplifting book in some ways and a book of inspiration about being involved in leadership positions if you are a woman, but one of the messages in the book actually is that in some ways, things haven't got any better for women in leadership positions, and reflection maybe that, it was better for Margaret Thatcher than it was now. Michelle Bachelet saying that her second term was worse than her first. To your own Prime Ministership, where some of the most unedifying moments in Australian political history. I think of those signs that were behind Tony Abbott that have been much discussed. The endless discussion of your reproductive choices or your fashion, and a pretty confronting analysis through the book that maybe things haven't got any better. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm an optimist overall, but very frustrated about the pace of change. So I agree with you. In the book, there are some statistics, some anecdotes that are truly confronting. Of those, we recount a wonderful piece of research done by an Australian academic, Blair Williams. She studied the British newspapers in the first 2 weeks after Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister all the way back in 1979 and compared it to the first 2 weeks after Theresa May became Prime Minister and found that the coverage is more gendered now. Now, I don't take from that the message that we've gone backwards on attitudes to gender. I think what it is the changing media landscape, and that things would be said now about a woman that would not have been said about out of a sense of politeness back in 1979. For example, there's that picture of Theresa May sitting with the Scottish leader, both women. They're talking about Brexit, about the integrity of the United Kingdom, about whether Scotland will be breaking off because they want to stay in the European Union. So you couldn't have a more pressing, dramatic, nation-changing political issue. And they've both got skirts on and they've both got their legs crossed, and a newspaper goes with the headline, "Forget Brexit, what about Legsit?" Who's got the better legs? Now, that would not have happened in Margaret Thatcher's day out of a sense of, sort of politeness and respect. And Michelle Bachelet from Chile, who we interviewed for the book, in reflecting in the difference between her first period as president and second period as president, pointed to social media. So one thing that is getting worse and that we talk about in the book is the media landscape. Social media is enabling things to be said about women that were historically not out there in the public realm, and we've got to act on that. And we have in the book some standout lessons for the media about how they should make sure their coverage isn't gendered, and some appeals really to the social media companies to do much better on cracking down on online misogynistic abuse, often threats of rape and death directed at women who are in the public square, particularly women politicians, and particularly women politicians of colour. But what makes me optimistic despite all of that is I've seen a lot of change in my lifetime. I'm seeing a new intensity to this discussion about gender equality. I'm seeing an emerging generation of young women leaders who are, full of energy for the fight. We talk about waves of feminism, and I do genuinely think we are seeing another one build, and the coming generation is too frustrated that they are going to emerge into a gendered environment to leave that as the circumstances for their working lives. I think they're going to be a powerful breakthrough generation. So overall, I'm optimistic and very encouraging of women who have got a passion for change to go into political leadership, even though there is still some gendered barriers to get through.
Thanks so much. And on that positive note, we might go to questions from the audience. Thanks for that, Ben, as well. We've got, 124 questions, so we're not going to get through all of those. So I do apologise, but we've got, like I said, about 2,300 participants on this webinar with us. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for your great questions. I'm going to start with one from James Bannon. He says he's in Melbourne and are living through the lockdown restrictions, and his partner and I are managing mentally as best we can, but that his children, 11 and 9, are suffering pretty badly, and it feels like to them that their world is ending and the future's very uncertain. So his question is, how can we best support children through what is essentially a bit of grief and trauma, especially when they've never experienced anything like that themselves?
That's a great question, and of course all the best to everybody in Melbourne. And one thing that we've been talking about at Beyond Blue and is clearly coming through when people contact our support services is they feel like the rest of the nation is stigmatising Melbourne and Victoria. So, we can have all of our sporting rivalries state to state and our little, carry-ons about each state. That's part of being Australian. Coming from South Australia, I've heard enough of that across my life. But now is not the time for it. Now is really the time to reach out and be as supportive as possible to everybody in Victoria. There are resources on the Beyond Blue website about how to talk to children about the pandemic, and some little tips about how to reassure them. Of course, one of the kind of problems, I think, is, we're all getting barraged by the media. We're all seeking out the media. We want to know what's happening next on the pandemic, but children necessarily hear a lot of that. They're there when the TV's on or whatever, but they don't have the skills to kind of decode it and absorb it the way adults do. And so the resources on the website do help you break it down, do help you find some ways of reassuring them, and some activities that can help them work through what the pandemic does mean and doesn't mean, and the prospect about when they'll be able to return to, school as normal, childcare as normal, seeing their friends as normal. So I would certainly refer to that.
Thank you. The next question is from Ingrid. She sent this in ahead of time. She facilitates a support group for people with bipolar disorder and has done that for 30 years or so, and said that she's found that isolation is a number one cause for the determination of people's emotional well-being. And during the pandemic, obviously they can't provide face-to-face support meetings and turn to things like Zoom, like we're on now, but found that many of the people couldn't access that because they don't have a computer or a smartphone. Some didn't have access to the internet. So Ingrid's question was, how can peer-run community organisations or other people in the community who are looking to reach out and support people help those who are struggling at this time if perhaps they don't have access to the internet and things like Zoom?
Yeah, obviously a very tough situation. And when we're talking about mental ill health during the pandemic, there will be people who, under these new and novel pressures, will feel that their mental health is at risk, and they haven't ever experienced that before in their lives. But there's a cohort of people who went into the pandemic with mental health challenges, bipolar, many other forms of mental health challenges. And the risk factors for them in managing their mental health have gone up during the pandemic, and even things like ensuring people can stay in good contact with their treating medical professionals, get the medication they need, that's got more complex too. When people don't have access to this kind of technology, obviously it's very hard for those who aren't in states with lockdown restrictions. There is still the potential for some face-to-face visiting and some face-to-face meeting. Obviously, that's got to be done in accordance with the rules everywhere. But for example, here in South Australia, where things are easier than Melbourne, it would be possible for a limited number of people to get together and discuss and support each other in person. And then, human voices, because we've got this alternative, we shouldn't underestimate the power that there is in a human voice and just a good conversation. So the old-fashioned telephone isn't without its uses right now either. So some of those telephone outreaches. But I recognise that people are trying to do amazing things against a very difficult backdrop, and we can only kind of do the best we can in the restraints that we face. But people are so creative and so determined. That does give me a lot of hope.
The next question, I've got a couple here that really touch on, I know you've already kind of spoken about workplaces, but that do touch on problems associated with workplaces, and that some people are quite delighted to be working at home, and for some that's very easy. Obviously, not everyone can work from home, but some really struggle with it. And we've got a lot of questions around the economic pressures resulting from compulsorily working at home in future without necessarily workplaces perhaps taking into account some of the issues that raises, but also again bringing up that idea of the mental health impacts of relying on insecure work and that uncertainty that comes along with that, or not having access to paid leave, for example. So just if you could reflect on that, please.
Yeah. I mean, our mental health is in many ways reliant on what the mental health professionals would tell us are the social determinants. So, we know that key risk factors for mental ill health are lack of work, so financial insecurity is a social determinant, a risk factor, insecure housing, homelessness, as well as loss of a sense of purpose. Some people get that through work, some people get it in other ways, and a loss of social connection. The CEO of Beyond Blue, Georgie, has often summarised this very elegantly. She says that it's about having a job, a roof over your head, and a date on Saturday night. And whenever she said that to the Beyond Blue board, half of us have gone, can't I stay home Saturday night? These were in the days that we had those kinds of choices. But what she's trying to get across in that short summation is all of these things are protective factors and they matter to us. Many people, as a result of this pandemic, are cut off from the social communication, the meeting with loved ones, family, friends. They're losing the sense of financial security. They've lost work. So these are risk exacerbators. Now, from the point of view of Beyond Blue and those who seek to provide mental health support, trying to work all of that, the social determinants, that's beyond us. That really is an agenda for government and the community, government at all levels, to try and get the economic supports right so people aren't crippled by financial insecurity, and to try and get the housing policies right so that issues about insecure housing aren't exacerbated at this time. What we can do is advocate on those things, and we most certainly do, and then try and deepen the web of connections for the social interactions, the things that human beings need from each other, and the support services there, the online engagements are there to give people some new ways of finding that person-to-person support that they need at this time.
Thank you. The next question is from Gail Edwards, who asks, and this might be another one that falls a bit into that category of Beyond Blue can't solve everything, but Gail's asking about equitable access to mental health practitioners. And we've obviously touched on the availability of telehealth, but she's asking about the gap fee between the Medicare rebate and fees charged by private practitioners, and that often people on Centrelink or people who might find themselves out of a job for the first time might not have the resources to access those types of things. Are you able to reflect on what is available and potentially what needs to be done to help meet that gap?
Yeah, this is certainly a problem in our mental health system as it currently stands. I mean, there are bulk billed and free at the point of access services, and to help navigate that system, people should get onto the Beyond Blue website or onto the support service, but not enough to meet demand, particularly at a critical time like this. And we from a reform perspective, yes, we need to have access to clinical services Australia-wide, but we're never going to have, nor in fact would it be desirable to have, a clinical mental health workforce that was so large that anybody with any form of mental health concern went to a clinician. That's not the long-term setting we need. We need these lower intensity models of care, which are actually more appropriate for many people who are getting into the first round of problems. And then we can keep the clinical services for those who truly need to be in the clinical system. The new access service that I spoke about before is in this low intensity space. It's access to a coach. It can be done by telehealth for those who are in lockdown or for whom that is the best way of interacting, and it is free at the point of access. So one thing that I would immediately recommend is getting in contact with Beyond Blue and seeing if you're in an area where those new access services are available.
We've also got a couple of questions here that touch on suicide, obviously at the very extreme end of mental health and distress, and also a couple of questions that touch on accessibility, particularly in regional areas, even though I guess the lockdown is really focused on Melbourne as a city. But would you mind just taking us through, for people who are having suicidal thoughts, what are the available options for people to reach out? And are we indeed seeing an increase in the number of people having those kinds of thoughts and reaching out for help within the system?
Yeah, there has been all sorts of modelling and potential projections around this, and we're very careful about how we talk about suicide and suicide statistics, because for us at Beyond Blue, really the prime message we want to get through is a message to people who are having those thoughts, but also a message to the community in general. And that message is that it's okay to talk about suicide with someone that you are concerned about. Many of us, indeed, until, Beyond Blue did the research, I would have thought this, that if there was someone amongst your family, friends or work colleagues who looked like they were in increasingly acute distress, that if you had a conversation with them and used the word suicide, you might somehow put the idea into their heads and you might make the whole thing worse. Now, research at Beyond Blue clearly shows that that is not right, and that caring, non-judgmental, but very frank conversations about suicide can make a very big difference. So you can have a conversation with someone saying, I've noticed these behaviour changes, I'm worried about you, where are you at? You can even be as express as, are you thinking about suicide? And you can encourage them to reach out. Lifeline obviously is a fantastic service for people who are in that form of crisis. And we at Beyond Blue work very collaboratively to make sure that people who call in end up at the right service, getting the right support. So the message here really is a message for all of us, that it's at the more, I'm going to say pointy end, maybe that's not the best way of putting it, but we talked before about the need to be checking in with each other to see if people are okay and to, create that web of connection. You can do that, frankly, about suicide if you think that's required because someone is in that emerging kind of distress. And things to look for include very noticeable behaviour changes. Now, to some extent, all of our behaviours are much changed during this pandemic from normal, but much greater reliance on alcohol, for example, much greater withdrawal from connection than would be expected for that person, no longer showing any form of enjoyment in things that they might have loved before, starting to talk about things like giving away possessions that are very important to them. All of those things can be just, some early indications that a very clear conversation and caring conversation needs to be had about suicide.
Thank you. I think that's really important information to share with everyone. And I will just say, if you are experiencing distressing thoughts, you can call Lifeline on 131114. That's 131114. And I've also included a link to the facts about suicide prevention from Beyond Blue's website with everyone on here today. But I do think that is important, not only to encourage people, I myself not having suicidal thoughts, but having a rough time personally, just called Lifeline just to have a chat with someone when I was going through some stuff personally, and it was really great. So I would encourage anyone who is having any distressing thoughts to do that. It's a wonderful service, along with what Beyond Blue is able to provide. But I might just finish up there with also just, can you touch on the fact that it is a global pandemic? It is unprecedented. This is extremely difficult for huge numbers of people for whatever reason, whether they've lost their job or they're distressed about friends or because they can't go anywhere. In a lot of respects, it's very normal to feel distressed at these times. It's not necessarily, I would imagine, an indication of mental health problems.
No, that's right. I mean, and this is, this is something to sort of think about and reflect in your own behaviours. It's absolutely okay and normal to feel sad about things that you used to do that you can't do now. I'm someone who's in recent years spent a lot of time overseas. I work with a team in London. I work with a team in Washington. London's the Global Institute for Women's Leadership. Washington's the Global Partnership for Education. They then reach out to countries around the world. And in my own life, I do feel sad that I can't be with those teams. I mean, we're doing all of this, but it's not the same as, sitting at my open plan desk in the Virginia Woolf building in London, hanging out with the young researchers and hearing what they're talking about. It's not the same as being in a GPE meeting and seeing ministers for education from countries around the world and getting to have a chat and really be with them and see what's happening through their eyes. I miss that. I miss, being able to travel around the country, see my friends in Melbourne. I'm uncertain about, what I should be doing to plan next year. I'm someone who likes to have a plan about their work and I can't utilize that plan. These are, we've all got different things, but I've got that, up and down around those things. And sometimes they press on me more heavily than others, depending on how you're feeling that day and how tired you are and all the rest of it. All of that, life's up and downs, the up and downs we feel in the pandemic, that's all normal sort of emotional reactions. But if you're getting to the stage where you're completely in your head, you're just on one of those roles where you in your head, focused on everything that's bad, everything that's wrong. There's a sense of hopelessness. You're not sleeping the way you normally would. You're not eating well. You're not, doing the exercise that you can do during restrictions. It's just a cycle that you can't shake yourself out of. If you're in that role and you feel like it could just be rolling down and down and down, then reach out for help at that point. Feeling, some up and down waves and some moments of distress and concern about where we are in the world, that's all understandable. But if it's becoming, all of that is just pressing on you and you can't get out of that, you can't feel moments of happiness and moments of relaxation, then that's the time to have the first conversation, and please get on to Beyond Blue.
Thanks. We've only got a couple more minutes. So just in 1 minute, I personally have reflected that working from home a bit more, I've really welcomed the expanded role of tracksuit pants in my life and their comfort. But thinking perhaps bigger picture than that, in less than a minute, Julia Gillard, are there any unexpected positives arising out of this crisis that you might like to leave us with?
I think on that working from home, I am hopeful that we can take the best of this with us into the future, not the compulsory bit of it, not people trying to combine work with homeschooling and all of those pressures, but the best of this. And if we can, I think it will make a real difference to gender progression and diversity in workplaces if we're actually assessing people on what they do rather than presenteeism in the office. I think that's one of the things we need to do for gender equality in the future. So, I certainly am going to make this more routine than the default position being jump on a plane to get somewhere. Then at a much more personal level, because so many of my overseas trips have been cancelled, I have been in Adelaide for the birth of my new great niece, baby Gwen. So that's a delight, and that's been a big upside for me.
Excellent. Well, we are going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time today, Julia, and thank you, Ben, as well. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all of them. You can buy Julia Gillard's new book, Women in Leadership. Ben, if you can hold that up for us there. Co-written with Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the ex-finance minister of Nigeria and former managing director of the World Bank. That's available at all good bookstores. I think Ben might have got that one from Paper Chain in Monica. And please join us over the next few weeks for more exciting webinars. Thanks very much, Julia. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ebony.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ebony.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
This has been a special episode of Follow the Money, and we're aiming to bring you shorter but more frequent episodes during the pandemic, so please stay tuned. For all the latest health information, you can visit health.gov.au or listen to the ABC's excellent CoronaCast podcast. If you're having any mental health issues, you can visit Beyond Blue at beyondblue.org.au. To register for future webinars, including our upcoming webinars with the UN Chief Economist and with former President of East Timor, Jose Ramos Horta, head to our website and visit tai.org.au/webinars. We're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a _N_T. Julia Gillard is at Julia Gillard and Ben Oquist is at Ben Oquist. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macey with help from Grace Crivellaro and Holly Forrest, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum. And remember, stay 1.5 metres away, wear a mask, keep washing those hands, and thanks for listening. And today we're going to leave you with a special treat. The Misogyny Speech, in song form, Not Now, Not Ever, in full and performed by the Australian Voices Choir, composed by Robert Davidson and conducted by Gordon Hamilton. You can find the clip on YouTube, and a special thank you to the Australian Voices for making it available to us. Again, that's Julia Gillard's infamous Misogyny Speech in song form. Thanks for listening.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I rise to oppose the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition. And in so doing, I say to the Leader of the Opposition, I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. Not now, not ever. The Leader of the Opposition says that people who hold sexist views and who are misogynists are not appropriate for high office. Well, I hope the Leader of the Opposition has got a piece of paper and he is writing out his resignation. Because if he wants to know what misogyny looks like in modern Australia, he doesn't need a motion in the House of Representatives. It needs a mirror. That's what he needs.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not.
And the government will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. Not now, not ever. Not now, not ever. Not now, not ever. Not now, not ever.
Not now, not ever, not ever, not ever, not now, not ever, not ever.
him. Now I'm looking at his watch because apparently a woman's spoken too long. I've had him yell at me to shut up in the past. But I will take the remaining seconds of my speaking time to say to the Leader of the Opposition, I think the best course for him is to reflect on the standards he's exhibited in public life. And the Leader of the Opposition should think seriously about the role of women in public life and in Australian society, because we are entitled to a better standard than this.